Friday the 13th, March 2020. There were those of you in whom I did promise I would tell this story. One wouldn't know if it were fear that kept most of us quiet, hushed tones and everything that is left unsaid. I did promise to share what was happening, the quiet embers of the universe's heart. With the sound of the ancestors, the day before, that day, I rested my wings, I heard the wind calling, and we made holy blessings of love and spent the afternoon talking with the ancestors. That it was happened the day before. I spoke with the ancestors. Forever so long, for as long as I can remember, there were those who had heard of what Friday the 13th may mean. Haunted, riddles, witchcraft, and the hollow suspicions of superstition. Most arrive when the calendar does its thing and counts days and calendars into serendipity. Mostly just days and dates and doubts. But there is of great reason to hold the date and day as a living, breathing crime time. The date was pre-told by a fellow sister from the human world who spoke the date in distraction from the demon. As soon as mouthed, the demon knew I knew. The warlock's footprints, as so it has been named. I felt the everything rumble up. Intuition, known as the gut feeling, took me to prepare. I can't quite remember what I was doing that day. Can't quite remember what I thought I was doing. But somehow I was taken to the parkland. For that brief time, no number played countdown. I was taken to the parkland, and before I knew it, I was summoned by the council. In the floppy fields between the wind's horizon and the urban green of Hassan Hyder's winter worn, the springtime setting sun called. Every time one allowed it, the setting sun called council to order. I remember I sat not afar from the path. The darkness spoke her warning, and I sat in council with the ancestors. The last time I had listened to the setting sun's call to council was in 2012, when I went into the forest to prepare for the end of the world. With the turning of the calendars, I climbed the ancient pyramid. A day of time traveling and meeting the ghosts was summoned into silence. Look west. I stripped my body bare. I sat on the pyramid and meditated a setting sun into the end of the world with forest as far as the eye could see. It was a similar feeling. I meditated, sat, like the Buddha, underneath his own Bodhi tree, and in holy council with the ancestors we made a prayer. We prayed for every soul and soullessness. We prayed for everything the light touches and everything that didn't know touch. We did a prayer of love to bring peace to the demon. Part 2. Lilith left Eden and was not banished. That creature, I don't know what he did, but he returned. I sat in meditation, It was the day before, and like a mystery, the funny little creature appeared. He did so many different sort of things, I don't even know if it was real, but he wanted me. He stopped so close, came so close, ratty, like a scab who wants to get close. Whiny weasel wants something from ya. He was like a snake, like a Lucifer. Never thought I'd say that. But I refused his temptation. Even Berlin's Gospels have a face. Sick teeth, the techno, the rot, the decay. No, darling, I am in counsel. Offer denied, the sun set. The last time I listened to the setting sun's call to counsel was on the pyramid, looking west, naked form. This time Lucifer came. Both times I took warning. Part 3. The setting sun knows darkness. In the black waters of murky, where the swans float over the ripple, faces faint to the light, faces stare back out. Sometimes demons, sometimes mermaids, sometimes pure emptiness, like the forgotten souls who were turned into koi. Mermaids stare out of the emptiness. But there are those of you in whom I did promise I would tell this story. The day before the portal opened, I made a prayer with the ancestors. In the flopping field that looked as real as a setting sun with a visiting Lucifer. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was to prepare the world for the next day, Friday the 13th. More than a date and a day, the demons were coming, and the ancestors asked me to manifest love in an embodied form as an offering of peace. I spent that evening with a friend and the soul who years earlier brought me back to life. Feel. It let me feel again, when banished to the numb. I spent the night with him and her, safe. That night, the fire in my pocket was a picture of death. It was a hand reaching out to me. Every time I played with fire, death was reaching out. Part 4.0. Hashtag I'm a survivor. No. Hashtag I will survive. That's what Gloria sang when she washed her hands. Part of me would like to just wash my hands of all of it. Part of me already had. So lasted the soul whom was stabbed in the head. I had to retrace my steps in order to remember. I walked past the slumbered peacocks, down the ditch valley to the dogs' fighting pit, Colosseum. I walked around the ring road moat and curled a scent up the peak. I walked through the face of spray, patchwork, polka dots of bud and blossom, playing illumination against the light of bare tree. I had to retrace my steps, but I could not find where I had held holy council. Now I know what a warning is. I can hear the demon again. Its sound and smell are disguised by the wind. But there are those of you whom I told I would tell this story. When clocked over days and dates, the most important thing was that the moon was ready. I was intoxicated by blasphemous toxins, and I went home via tea room without the old men, via the asteroid crater, the place where I learnt to read the time. I bumbled through the darkness, that land I knew, and came to me the two-souled warrior. He was a man and a shadow, both lost to the darkness. He came offering me toxins. I said no, homeward bound. Then he went for my phone. Like a cyborg, wire cords and coils and hand phones caught round the neck. I was tangled in the substance blaster music maker. The phone was caught. Amateur, an amigo said. I learnt how to self-mythologize long ago. I know what it means to be heard. He pulled from me, pulled out, arms held and coils wrapped, entangled. My arm pulled over to his. He pulled out a knife. I call it a knife, but it was not. It was different, looked different. When he pulled it out, I was more intrigued than alarmed. He pulled out a crystal, a deep watermelon seed stone with a thin diamond glisten cut in the shape of a knife. I lay my hand on his, for when I saw the crystal that I call a knife, I tried to banish it. Don't do this. Don't do this. I kept repeating. Amateur. He was rough. I was just worried he would stab my gut. That was my gut feeling fear. So I put my arm on his and said, don't do this. When I've tried to describe this series of events, I don't know how I got on the ground, but he got me down. And that's when he stabbed me. His hand held above my head, and with his knife reflexing back and forwards, he stabbed at me. And with a big gusto of kung fu hit, I on my back, with my mum present as the form of a bull, I lay on my back and in my full force felt the my mama with me, in the presence of a bull. I did a big double kick and mama charged at him and blew him off. I got up and ran. I ran from him as fast as I could. I was close to home, unlocked the door. He didn't follow me and I was dripping blood. I made it through 2 gates. I ran upstairs. I entered the house, an empty door for one housemate. The other, a biblical name, called out with no response. David. No, time, silence. I later found out he was home, but all screams, no silence at some stage. Turban wrapped, I was bleeding too much. Phone charging, internet search, Wi-Fi didn't give a number easily. I was dripping blood everywhere. I called the ambulance. For the record, emergencies 112, but apparently 911 works everywhere. Then I called my sister. She would later tell me that about 5 minutes before the call, she was woken up, middle of the night, 5 a.m., 5 minutes before the call, or whatever the phone record says. I had about 1 phone call. I tried the friends from that night, but we all sleep with our phones on silent. 5 minutes before the call, my sister was woken by my mum. I called. I've been attacked. I've called an ambulance, but I've been stabbed in the head and I'm worried I'm losing too much blood. The ambulance arrived. On the other side of the international call, my sister said, "Stay with me." Ambulance and police said something, I don't remember, but they said time to go, hospital. They stitched me up, instructions were followed, the guardian angels made their calls, and a friend showed up. She cried when she saw me. I was okay, botched, but okay. I'd been crying blood, stigmata. 2 weeks ago, I was stabbed in the head. 2 weeks later, I survived. Quoth the raven, evermore. My moon finally read my love letter, same time as the attack. She made contact. How are you amongst the crisis? Which one, I asked. When I was on the pyramid, when I was called into Holy Council of Setting Sun in Guatemala, the moon knew something happened. She thought it was the earthquake. In the end of the world, the earthquake hit Guatemala. It was that time that I met the puma. I don't want to talk about that. Already it's been turned into a bastardized story of Blake who survived. I'm a survivor. And cats have 9 lives. How many have you lost? I was asked. 9 lives. The cat had 9. When the puma called me to fight, I ran. And the next day, the shaman told me he'd been watching. He could smell jaguar, spirit guide. Enough said. The moon asked, "Are you surviving the crisis?" I asked, "Which one?" The night I was stabbed in the head, the moon, my great love, read my love letter as she escaped. The phone call started with tears and ended with the moon telling me she looked forward to when we lived in the same city and she would be able to hug me when she wanted. Part 2. I tried to tune into the Homeland News, national radio, breakfast time zone time slot, to try and get an update. Hashtag stay home and get an update. I tuned into the Homeland News, and even they just wanted to talk about what's out my window and on the island of museums. Remnants of a civilization called equivalent to a Hellenistic pantheon. No, there is no voice who can speak voice to this illusion, to this prophecy, to this we call existence evermore. Rest now, darling. Rest now, O wise sage. There will be more to come, I promise. But there are those of you in whom I told I would tell this story. We try to understand everything around us, as if everything around us were a thing to be understood. We grapple with faint memories, or when was the last time we spoke? When was the last time that I thanked for a history and for a footprint that once was shared? When was the last time and the next time when the weeds were pulled off earth in a game of order, where the game was forfeited, but we still pretended the rules of control? In the blink of an eye, it may all change. In the blink of an eye, it did. Holy prayers of a Nietzsche materialized, and the world was changed, but we still pretended the rules of control. And then after the stocks have been bled dry and panic ripples risk, no one of the no ones know when to stop. You are invited, she said. Divine feminine, divine everything deity of existence evermore. You are invited, she said, to sing the hopeful horn of you are only human. A most beautiful creature. A beautiful creature fleshed with radishes of comfort and moving limbs and stubbornness to survive and pretended the rules of control. You are a beautiful creature with needs and wants and desires and a wild fantasy that dreams of impossibilities and floats out evermore. I am only human, we said, and laid head rescues the eagle's breath of the limits of what it means to be I'm alive. You are a most beautiful creature. You are part of this everything of this now. And it is a pleasure to exist as eternity with you. In the warlock's footprints, as soon as mouthed, the demon knew I knew. But there are those of you in whom I told I would tell this story. I know what it means to be heard, and the demon knew that I knew. But many look away when the verdict is said. When the servant to love came to visit with me, he brought the words of warning that when the soul leaves the body and the body is in trance and the spirit takes invitation, one cannot look into the eyes of the spirit form possession. Look away. Even the wisest of our old sages says, look away. In my container of the still, I may close my eyes. I feel the sun on my face. I may look away under hushed tones of fear, but they are still there, like a frequency or a beating heart rhythm. The gargoyles are close, clumsy, archaic, the personification of our foolish ways. They were the fools we chose to be, the fools that were left behind. In the agelessness of our timeless time, we or the gargoyles were all that was left behind. Part 2. The Holy Council of Ancestors, summoned by the setting sun, Soleil. The Holy Council said, so as things are, let them be as they are. and words were spoken of fragility and delicate. So fragile and delicate. The demon's sound and smell were disguised by the wind. The test of distinction has always been left up to the eye of the beholder, and I was left with only one eye. Soft, slopey, slumpy. Rest those eyes and just feel the sun on the face. Look away, for answers will not be found by what you see. I, as we, are your mystery. And darkness meets the white light, and the arrow points the other way to death and decay, and I am flooded by the red-blooded beating through my veins. I am alive, delicate and fragile. In another story that many of us left here, Hercules was always told he was special, but he could only do what he could. Time warped to the present, we can only do what we can. As days turned to weeks after the warning, I was bandaged and patched and swollen. I had been through the human world's ground zero. Eternity, formerly known as the present, was described as an epidemic. And so to the hospital I did go, ground zero, judgment day, with an endless waiting line and checkpoint quarantine and the remnants of gargoyles disguised by their masks. And once through, the humans home to the present were empty halls, visitorless and hopeful for a speedy recovery, where I too was told time to heal. With the one eye, I don't see things from both perspectives. It's all as clear as day, or somehow flattened, moonwalk, trippy perspective shift, 2 dimensions flattened to know no form, so it all dissolves, transparent. I think I have a crack in my skull. Perhaps the demon knew what was housed in my head, hoping the secrets would trickle out. But the earth has spoken that it is time to breathe. Whilst the gargoyles were writing dear diaries as the chronicles of this time. Dear diary, I feel as if I'm living through history. Nothing like this has ever happened before. Dear diary, they're acting like mad. The shelves are still empty and they're playing nighttime clangs on the balcony for the caring staff. Dear diary, can't pay my rent and subsidies. Plans, no plans, I'm freaking out and they haven't even closed the borders. Dear diary, it's about everyone else. What about the elders? In an aging society with youth on its mind, every time an old person dies, a library burns down, and our house is on fire, and the lungs of the earth can't breathe, and we don't have enough respirators. Dear diary, it came from the bats. I heard it was the pangolin, that funny little sand-eater with scales. Titling claim most poached mammal in the 6th great extinction. But they'll find a vaccine. I mean, most vaccines come from the forest, the coughing up lungs of the earth. And 2019 had a few trees cut, bit of land cleared. 2019, it was a good year. But the dolphins are returning to Venice, the swans are returning to Berlin, and the white giraffe returned to Paris. Fake news, mate. Can't fucking trust no one. Dear diary, it's all about community and scale And now I can't even leave the house. The global loops of everything out there global. The skies are just so much clearer and the world's in training and like conferences. No more business trips. We've just been trained on the remote. And oh gee, the 5G is going to radio wave through our heads. Cause has your internet been slow? Watch out, watch it roll out, dear diary. What about our everybody without a home? What about those whose home isn't safe? And what about those who have a lot bigger concerns on their mind? Survival screams a louder voice than the cough of a flu, dear diary. Everyone's counting down the days. Everybody's waiting for it all to be over to say, welcome to a new reality. When we unlock the lockdown and say, so as things are, let them be as they are, dear diary, dear mama. If I imagine you as an embodied form, I know you would hate being housebound. But instead you are free of form and safe, and you come and go as you do. I remember for ever so long after you passed, I was my own medical mystery. Ligaments and phantom unexplainables left a clipped wing. Shoulder of medicine man and witch doctor unexplained. 'Twas my clipped wing, unexplainable, but it did heal, as ever one promised the grief would heal, and I took flight once more. Now again, my sloppy, slumpy eye, hanging head, puppy dog face tells me to close my eyes and stop looking. We cannot see what comes next, for what is cannot be seen. Soleil. There are those of you I told I would tell this story. Others will not hear, and others will tell their own. In the dawn of Aquarius, in the first full moon after the portal had been opened, Iona spoke as the ancestors and told me I was now able to see in the darkness with a new truth. It is the unfolding. And now I see in the dark. When the moon was as full as reflection, I let it take me. The world fell apart from under my feet, and I was in the abyss. The empty hall, an expanse of shadows that go on for forever. 'Twas merely me, impassive form, open for empathy. The setting sun knows darkness, a most beautiful creature. This timelessness tale, the story of the demon, is an age-old, ageless tale, lived out and told throughout the ages. O wise demon, your power and your wisdom is great and beyond. Let us from you learn the shock and panic of loss and change, and from ourselves learn the care and openness of a resilient heart. For each face of emptiness that haunts the murky shadow, let us forgive. We forgive you as we forgive ourselves. The gargoyles, that was all that was left behind. In humble offering, take my soul and form as your sacrifice, where death and decay be screamed by the newborn cry. in flight, in peace, in love, evermore. And what of you, O Spirit Guide? What would you say, Mother dear? A pause, as if for eternity, late, with a reply. I'm just grateful to be I'm alive. With a pause, as if for eternity, late, to which I replied, stories are where we may practice life, and life is where we may practice eternity. I remember I did have my corona coronation, my quintessential essence, told out as the life I live. It was weeks since I'd been stabbed in the head and the swelling wasn't going down. So I was ping-ponged through doctors' referrals and returned to the emergency room where they patched me up. The doctors were just worried it were nerve damage and the face wouldn't fix. So they admitted me and kept me in hospital for the night. Everybody was worried that the incident was a trauma for me and one that would usher in fear. But I don't feel like I'd been through a trauma. I wasn't just numb and locked in. I protected myself. I did what I had to do. Fight and flight. And I felt sort of empowered. Sort of. Whilst we were told our mantra was to feel through the numb. I'd been through enough moments of shock to get through. Our world does fall apart. Everything does change in a heartbeat. We did break up. He died. My mum died. Our greatest fears do come true. And it's the end of our world as we know it. But the world doesn't stop. Life keeps going as life after death. And time heals all wounds. I felt as if I had been trained in trauma. And we are the masters of our own destiny. When I was stabbed in the head and worried I was bleeding too much, I remember I said, "Fuck that. This is not my time to die." And I adapted and I survived. But when the doctors told me that it may be nerve damage, and I was told that's more permanent, I was faced with a future that I could not see properly, a permanent numb. Me, as the arse, assumed I survived, I would heal, everything would go back to how it was, I'll be fine, get over it. But the experts were saying, but maybe the scars won't heal. And maybe what happened in that moment would look out the mirror forevermore. I remember I felt so incredibly alone. The hospitals were locked off. Army checkpoints to secure the base, and the walls and halls were empty. I just kept getting lost, and there was no one to ask for directions. The hospital halls and the waiting rooms were empty, quarantine, and I felt incredibly alone. The world felt incredibly far away, where my usual routine of jump or flight at the drop of a hat, spontaneous. Now the borders were closed, and there were no more flights, and felt far away. Nowhere. I didn't tell anyone, I was in hospital, just the family, far away, with the permanent numbness of scars and legacy. No one could visit anyway. An empty hospital with the sound of squeaky on the shoes echo. I wanted to write about it at the time. I wanted to try and trace make and document that experience at the time, but I kept telling myself, no, just live it now. Live the experience and reflect on it another time. I didn't meditate or experience it as a sort of spiritual sort of creature. I was just a human, waiting. It took me a whole story to try and remember that.